Marcus Winter sat alone in his lab, hunched over his microscope, his face bathed in the cold glow of fluorescent lights. The world outside was dark, quiet, with only the soft hum of the ventilation system filling the silence. He should have been asleep. It was well past midnight, and yet here he was, wrapped up in what could only be described as an obsession. His fingers moved feverishly over his keyboard, scrolling through endless lines of data. He had spent the last year on this project, an experiment in genetic mutation and human enhancement. The Paleotech Corporation, a secretive organization with deep pockets and darker intentions, had entrusted him with research that could potentially change the course of human history, and yet, all Marcus had to show for it was a series of incomplete genetic sequences and a string of inexplicable anomalies. Come on, he muttered under his breath, tapping his fingers against the desk. His screen flickered, and then a new result appeared, Subject 42. It was the most promising sample yet. The genetic data revealed some sort of anomaly, a dormant gene buried deep within the human DNA, a gene that had been lying inert for millennia, waiting to awaken. A sudden, sharp vibration from his phone broke Marcus from his trance. He looked down at the screen and saw the name, Julian Collins. Julian was Marcus's best friend from grad school, a former colleague, and, until recently, someone Marcus had hardly heard from. He swiped the screen to answer the call. Hey, Julian. What's up? The voice on the other end was shaky, urgent. Marcus, you've gotta come over. Something's wrong. What's going on? Marcus sat up, immediately alert. I don't know, man. It's hard to explain. I've been having these dreams. No, not just dreams. They feel real, Marcus. They feel like I'm living a different life, like I'm a dinosaur. There was a pause, and then Julian's voice cracked with frustration. I swear to God, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Marcus rubbed his temples, trying to process the strange words. Julian, I think you've been overworking yourself. Maybe you should. No, Marcus, you don't get it. These dreams are getting worse. I can hear things. Voices. And they're calling me. A cold shiver ran down Marcus's spine. Julian, calm down. Tell me exactly what's happening. Where are you? There was a long silence. Then, Julian's voice, barely a whisper, came through the phone. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I'm not me anymore. I feel like I'm something else. Marcus didn't waste any more time. He grabbed his coat, stuffed his phone into his pocket, and bolted out the door of the lab. It wasn't far to Julian's apartment, only about a 10-minute drive, but the streets felt eerily quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. His mind raced. What could be happening to Julian? Was it a mental breakdown? Some kind of psychosis triggered by stress, or maybe something more? When he arrived, he found the front door of Julian's apartment ajar. Marcus pushed it open, his heart pounding. He called out to his friend, Julian. There was no answer. But the apartment felt off. The usual clutter of pizza boxes and beer cans was replaced by an eerie stillness. As Marcus moved further into the room, he saw Julian sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his face pale and drenched in sweat. Julian? Marcus knelt down beside him. What happened? Julian's head shot up, his eyes wide and frantic. It's happening, Marcus. It's happening to me. Before Marcus could respond, Julian's body twitched violently. His breathing grew shallow, and his muscles spasmed, as if he were trying to break free from an invisible force. Marcus grabbed his shoulders, trying to steady him. Julian. What's happening? And then it happened. A low, rumbling growl emanated from Julian's throat, a sound that sent a jolt of fear through Marcus's chest. His friend's eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity, and for a split second, Marcus thought he saw something primal, flashing in Julian's gaze. Julian, stop! Marcus shouted, shaking him. But Julian didn't respond. Instead, he staggered to his feet, his movements unnaturally jerky, like a marionette pulled by strings. The air in the room seemed to thicken. The temperature dropped, and Marcus suddenly felt as if the walls were closing in on him. Something was happening. Something far beyond anything he had ever studied in his career. Julian's fingers curled into claws. His once human hands now resembled the talons of a bird of prey, and the muscles in his arms swelled with unnatural power. Oh God, what is this? Marcus muttered to himself. Julian's chest heaved with labored breaths, and then he let out a terrifying roar, one that was unmistakably not human. The sound shook the room, and for a moment, Marcus thought the windows might shatter. But then Julian collapsed, his body sagging like a rag doll. His breath was ragged, and his eyes rolled back in his head. Marcus could only stare in horror, unsure of what he was witnessing. After a few moments, Julian stirred, groaning weakly. His eyes flickered open, but they weren't the same. Something was different about them, sharper, predatory. Marcus, he rasped. I don't know what's happening to me. But I can feel it. It's inside me. I can't stop it. Marcus swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had seen mutations before, but nothing like this. Nothing even close. This wasn't just a physical transformation, it was something deeper. I need to get you to a hospital, Marcus said, his voice steady, though his hands were trembling. But Julian shook his head, his expression growing distant. No hospital. I can't go back. They're calling me, Marcus. The others. They want me to join them. Marcus froze. Who? What are you talking about? The others, the ones like me. I can feel them, they're out there. And they're coming for me. Marcus's mind raced. He had heard rumors about genetic experiments being conducted under the radar, but he never imagined something like this would be the result. What kind of technology, or dark science, could cause this? And who else was involved? Before he could say anything, Julian's body went rigid again. This time, his transformation was even more intense. His breathing became deep and steady, and his muscles seemed to grow, his skin stretching taut over his bones. Marcus backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. Then Julian spoke again, his voice somehow different, more commanding. I am not alone, Marcus. I am one of many. And together, we will reclaim what is ours. Marcus felt a cold, creeping dread crawl up his spine. There was something terrifyingly inevitable about Julian's words. It wasn't just a mental breakdown. This was something far worse. Something far older. It was as if Julian had tapped into a force buried deep within humanity's genetic history. Something that had been dormant for eons, waiting for the right moment to resurface, and now, it seemed, that moment had arrived. Marcus stumbled backward, his mind whirling. Julian's words, "We will reclaim what is ours," echoed in his ears like a death knell. It was absurd, unbelievable even. How could this be happening? What was happening to his friend? The very idea that something so ancient, so primal, could awaken inside a human being in the 21st century seemed impossible. But as he watched Julian's body morph, his limbs becoming more defined, muscles swelling under skin that seemed to stretch and ripple, Marcus knew he wasn't imagining this. This was real. Julian's face contorted, his features twisting in an almost painful way. For a moment, Marcus feared that his friend might break apart, torn between two worlds, one human, one something else entirely. The eyes that looked up at him were still Julian's, but they weren't. They were sharper now, deeper, as if they had seen centuries pass, as if they carried the weight of ancient knowledge. The boy he once knew was slipping away, replaced by something far older, something more dangerous. I don't understand, Marcus whispered, his voice trembling as he took another cautious step backward. Julian, please, you have to tell me what's happening to you. Why are you changing? Julian opened his mouth to speak, but only a low growl emerged, a guttural sound that vibrated through the room like the roar of a beast trapped inside human skin. His lips curled back from his teeth that were longer now, sharper, more like fangs than human canines. A cold sweat broke out across Marcus's brow. Were these the results of his experiments? No, it couldn't be. The data had been so clear, so controlled. He hadn't intended for any of this. He hadn't designed these changes, these monstrous, impossible transformations. And yet, here they were, unfolding before him, with Julian as the unwilling subject. Suddenly, Julian's body jerked forward, his hands reaching for Marcus, claws extended like a predator pouncing on its prey. But then he stopped. His body froze, as if something inside him were holding him back, a conflict of wills that played out in the tense silence between them. I can't, Julian murmured, his voice strained. It's in me, Marcus. The others are calling. They're telling me to come to them. They're telling me to join them, to bring back the old world. Marcus shook his head, his heart racing. What are you talking about? What others? The collective, Julian rasped. The mind. The group. The consciousness. It's awakening inside all of us. He stood up, his movements stiff, yet purposeful. They've been waiting. We've all been waiting. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. No. No, this isn't you. This isn't what you want. But Julian's eyes had turned a strange shade of amber now, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. It's not what I want anymore, Marcus. I don't have a choice. It's inside me, inside all of us. We are becoming them. Marcus's pulse raced. He had to stop this. Whatever this was, whatever genetic curse had been unleashed, it wasn't just a freak accident. It was deliberate. The more Marcus thought about it, the more he realized that the experiments, the research, the project he had been so focused on, had triggered something far beyond his understanding. The genetic markers in those samples, the dormant DNA, they had not just been awakened. They had been activated. The collective mind Julian spoke of, it wasn't just a metaphor. It was real, and it was spreading. Julian took a step toward him, his gait almost animalistic now. The predator in him had awakened fully. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that terrified Marcus, it was the knowledge, the understanding that Julian was no longer the person he had known. He was becoming part of something much larger, something that could never be reversed. We have to stop it, Julian, Marcus said, his voice firm despite the fear clawing at him. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what this means. This collective? It's not just a group of people. It's a hive mind, an alien consciousness. It's not you. It's a parasite. But Julian only smiled, a twisted grin that spread across his face like a promise of doom. You don't get it, Marcus. It's not a parasite. It's the next step in evolution. The world was ours once. It will be ours again. Marcus's heart dropped into his stomach. He had heard whispers of something like this, rumors of a new age, a new dawn for humanity. But it had always seemed like fantasy, a myth, something too outlandish to be real. Yet here he was, standing face to face with the nightmare that had been set in motion, and his best friend, once a brilliant scientist like himself, was becoming a tool of that very nightmare. Julian's eyes flickered briefly, as if something inside him was struggling to surface. For a split second, Marcus thought he might get through to him, that Julian might remember who he was, the person he used to be. But then the moment passed. Julian's body twitched, and the predatory glare returned. I have to go now, Marcus, Julian said softly, his voice almost serene. They're waiting for me. They're calling. Before Marcus could react, Julian darted out the door, moving with a speed and grace that was anything but human. It was as though the laws of physics no longer applied to him. He was a creature, not a man, a hunter, driven by a primal force that Marcus could barely comprehend. "Julian, wait!" Marcus shouted, but the apartment door slammed shut before he could reach it. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his mind reeling. What now? Where had Julian gone? And what did this collective mean? Could it be that others had already been infected, transformed, and that this was just the beginning? He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't let humanity fall into the hands of whatever this was. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket, jerking him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, his fingers trembling as he saw the name on the screen, Dr. Teresa Lee. His pulse quickened. Dr. Lee was one of the lead researchers on the project, the one person who had always seemed to understand the danger of what they were working on. But her warning had always been vague, shadowed in secrecy. He answered the call, his voice sharp. "Teresa, where are you? What the hell is happening?" "Julian, he's not Julian anymore." There was a long pause on the other end, then Teresa's voice, low and filled with urgency. "Marcus, you need to listen to me carefully. Everything you've seen tonight, it's just the beginning. The others are already awakening. The collective is real. And it's growing faster than we anticipated." "What the hell are you talking about?" Marcus snapped, panic rising in his chest. "Julian, he's changing. Into something monstrous." "There's no going back, Marcus," Teresa replied, her voice tight with fear. "The genes we activated, they're not just about strength or speed. They're connected to a deeper, older intelligence. A consciousness that spans across the human race, waiting to emerge. It's not just your friend, it's happening to all of them. The group mind is awakening, and it's pulling them together. They're no longer individuals. They're becoming a force. A hive mind." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "And what happens if they succeed? What happens if they all come together?" "The world as we know it ends," Teresa said softly, her voice laced with dread. "They'll try to reclaim what's theirs. They'll rise as something more powerful than humanity ever was. They'll recreate the world, under their rule." The line went dead, and Marcus stared at his phone, unable to move, unable to process the weight of her words. Marcus stared at the phone for a long moment, his mind frozen in shock. The weight of Dr. Lee's words pressed down on him, each syllable sinking deeper into the pit of his stomach. They're becoming a force. A hive mind. The world as we know it ends. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. Julian wasn't some kind of monster. He wasn't a part of anything that couldn't be reversed, right? But as Marcus thought back to the look in Julian's eyes, the way he'd spoken, the way he had changed, he realized that the transformation was more profound than he had ever imagined. It was almost as if Julian was no longer fighting it, as if the ancient instincts and impulses buried deep in his DNA were taking over. Shaking his head, Marcus tried to refocus. He needed to think clearly. Julian wasn't the only one. There had to be others like him. Others who were either already awakened or soon would be. Teresa had said that the group mind was spreading faster than anticipated. What did that mean for the rest of the world? How many people had been exposed to the same genetic alterations? Were they all experiencing the same thing? Were they all hearing the call? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, pacing around the apartment, his mind spinning in 100 directions. He couldn't do this alone. He had to find answers, real answers, and he had to stop the spread of whatever this was before it was too late. But how? He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and stormed out of the apartment. The cold air hit his face as he stepped outside, the night sky hanging over him, thick and oppressive. It felt like the world had changed in an instant. The city, which had always been a symbol of human achievement, now felt small and fragile, like it was teetering on the edge of something monstrous and unknown. Marcus knew he had to find Julian, or at least find the others. He had to know who else had been affected, who else had begun the transformation, and who else was hearing the call. But where could he even start? Julian hadn't given him any clues. He hadn't said where he was going, just that they were waiting for him. Waiting for him, Marcus turned on his heel and walked briskly toward his car, his thoughts racing ahead of him. There was only one place he could think of, the only place where the answers might be hidden. Paleotech.it had always been there in the background, lurking, waiting for its moment. But now, it was clear. The organization's work was no accident. It had known what it was doing. It had been setting the stage for this awakening for years, pulling strings, guiding the development of human genetic experiments that were now leading to the creation of something beyond human. And if Marcus was going to stop this madness, he needed to get to the heart of it. The drive to the Paleotech facility felt like an eternity. Marcus didn't bother with the radio or distractions. His thoughts were too loud, the weight of his next decision too heavy. The road ahead was unclear. Every moment that passed, he felt the pull of the awakening growing stronger, not just for Julian, but for him, too. He could feel it, the whispers, the call. It was inside him now, too. The DNA alterations were messing with his mind, tugging at something deep inside of him. It wasn't just Julian who was affected. Every person who had been exposed to these genetic changes, every one of them, was part of it now. As he pulled into the Paleotech parking lot, the enormity of what he was about to do hit him like a freight train. He didn't know what he'd find inside, or whether he'd even be able to stop it. But he couldn't back down. He had to find answers. The facility was dark, only a few scattered lights glowing in the windows. It looked abandoned, but Marcus knew better. Paleotech's operations were secret, hidden away from the public eye. This wasn't just a research center, it was a place where the fate of humanity was being decided, one experiment at a time. He parked and climbed out of his car, his boots clicking against the pavement as he approached the main entrance. He had been here a dozen times before, but now it felt different. The building seemed less like a place of scientific inquiry and more like the lair of some ancient predator, waiting to pounce. The door was locked, but that wasn't a problem. Marcus had keys. He had access. He knew the building better than anyone. With a quick flick of the wrist, the door opened, and Marcus stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals and sterilization, the scent of technology humming in the background. He made his way through the sterile corridors, his footsteps echoing off the walls. He had been to this part of the building before, but it had never seemed so ominous. The quiet was deafening, almost like the place was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, he found it, the lab. The heart of the research. The place where it all began. The lights flickered to life as he entered, and he froze at the sight before him. Dozens of screens lined the walls, all displaying genetic sequences and data he couldn't even begin to understand. But what caught his attention was the figure standing in front of one of the screens, Teresa Lee. She stood motionless, staring at the data in front of her. Her back was to Marcus, but he could see the way her shoulders were slumped, as if she were carrying a burden too heavy to bear. "Teresa?" Marcus called softly, his voice almost a whisper. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, her face pale. For a moment, she looked as if she hadn't heard him, as if she were lost in the depths of the data in front of her. But then she blinked, and recognition flashed in her eyes. "Marcus," she said quietly, her voice hollow. "You shouldn't be here." "I need answers," Marcus replied, his tone firm but urgent. "What the hell is going on? What did you do?" Teresa's eyes flickered to the screen behind her, and for the first time, Marcus saw the full extent of the data. It wasn't just about the genetic alterations. It was about something else. Something that was alive. A consciousness, shared, collective, ancient. "The others," Teresa whispered. "They're already out there. The collective. It's too late to stop it now. It's already begun. The awakening has started, and there's no going back." Marcus's heart raced. He had to stop this. He had to find a way to reverse it, before it was too late. Teresa shook her head. You don't understand. It's not something we can control. It's inside of them. Inside of all of us now. The collective is awakening, Marcus. The instincts, the memories of the dinosaurs, they're rising up inside us. We are becoming something else. No, Marcus said, his voice tight with fear and determination. You can't let this happen. You can't let them take over. This isn't who we are. Teresa looked at him, her eyes filled with regret. It's not up to us anymore. It never was. We just unlocked something that we didn't understand. And now it's too late. As she spoke, the walls seemed to close in on Marcus. He could feel the weight of what she was saying. It was too late. The collective was awakening, and soon, it would be unstoppable. The only question was whether humanity would survive, or whether they would become part of the ancient, primal force that had begun to rise once more.